his presentation, but we want to keep it, this is a family museum, no X-rated observations or experiences. So Jim has come on board as our treasurer, but he's been here a long time as an avid history buff, and he detects, he's found lots of stuff, from roads to coins to whatever. He's a retired architect, and we got to talking about the quarries, and he has done above and beyond research. And so without further ado, Jim Koch.
Let's see if this works. Is that too loud? Okay. Thank you, Marcia. First of all, I do want to thank the museum for all the support that they've given me. The inspiration from this was actually Marcia. I call her my inspiration. She'll say that I stole her idea. But I'm from Stanwood. It's really flat up there. We don't have the hills and rivers and quarries that the southwestern side does. So once I started seeing the photographs, I became intrigued by the history of this quarry. I have to limit my presentation to the Bealer quarries. Pretty much the 35 years that they were officially owned by the Bealer family, due in part because some of the stuff that happened after that is not for public consumption. It's interesting to start hearing stories when you talk about the history that everybody has a quarry story. The presentation is also limited to the actual quarries themselves, and that's simply because of scope and time. It does not get into individual families other than two individuals from the Bealer family. It does not get into the lime kilns because I believe that is going to be another topic since we have Lime City and the Cedar Valley lime kilns. So I've kind of parsed that off to the side. So I guess without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. First of all, I hope everybody knows where Cedar Valley is at. If you're here, obviously you have an interest. It's pretty well known. It's kind of out in the triangle there between Rochester, West Branch, and Tipton. Sure. The other thing that I want to make sure of is there's always been confusion about what you call each one of the pits. The one closest to the river was the original pit. So using the same terminology as the Cedar Valley Park, that's going to be called the front pit. And the second pit behind it is the back pit. So the history actually begins in 1884 with E.J.C. Bealer is constructing a bridge from between Buchanan and Plato for the Burlington, Cedar Rapids, and Northern Railroad. Now, E.J.C. had been in that area, but as far as the public knew, they did not know what was actually at the Fitzpatrick Quarry site as far as unnatural resource. So the first thing the newspaper talks about, and it's always interesting to read the newspapers from that time because they always approached everything from the side, but there was probably an inkling that had something to do with the railroad or a quarry. The thing that most people did not know is that the quality of the stone was exceptional, and even Professor Samuel Calvin from the university, who was a state geologist for several years, later came back, and when he talked about it, he said it was probably some of the best. In his mind, it exceeded Stone City stone for its durability and workability, and for the deposits that were there. One thing to understand, and people that have been around the quarries their whole life, is that prior to quarrying, there was a hill probably 60 to 70 feet tall on top of the quarries that came down to the river in bluffs. So when they first started quarrying, you can see on the left-hand side, the green line indicates probably either the face of the bluff or the toe of the hill. And a lot of that, had to be taken off in order to even start the deep pits. Now, there was good solid stone above the level that we now consider ground level, and it was quarried off. But as you look at the photographs, you just need to realize that if you don't recognize something, it's because they took it and shipped it down the railroad. So in 1884, by the time things got underway, there were newspaper articles talking about what was going on out there and what had happened, and that the railroad had already put a spur in. And it's not surprising that Bealer managed to get a spur since he was building railroad bridges for the BCR and then. But they extended it down, and that essentially put him in business. They can now bring in rail cars. Bealer was actually born in Switzerland. He immigrated to the United States around age 4. And they ended up in Newton Falls, Ohio with his family, where his dad ran a quarry. And they then, let's see if I can find the date, moved to Iowa City in 1856. And again, his dad was involved in stone quarrying. Many of you might have heard of the Capitol Quarries or the old Capitol Quarries, where they took stone for the original Capitol in the 1840s. That's located in the vicinity of Sugar Bottom. And that was just a small river. It had bluffs, and that was quarried. So that's kind of where he grew up, working with his dad. At I think age 12, his mother died, and he went to work I think the article said, as a full-grown man, teaming with his dad, running a wagon in the quarries. By the time he was 17, the Civil War had broken out. He enlisted, and he served for 3 years, all through the South. There's an extensive record of where he fought and what he did. He was wounded, and he was mustered out after the war. And he went back to working with his father, and what they did is they were contractors for bridges and streets. The first road between Iowa City and Cedar Rapids, they provided all the culverts, stone culverts at that time. So they had a fairly well-developed business, and by 1878, Bealer had moved to Cedar Rapids and was running several very successful companies. So once the rail spur was completed, the first thing Bealer does is ask the county for a new bridge across the river. He was about 6 mile trip to any town. And with the infrastructure and the number of people he had out there, he needed access. It'd take the county 4 years, but it'd finally get built. And through the early years, 1884, 85, 86, he does extensive construction, not only the work in the quarry, but he brings in houses for workers, his offices, his sheds, his light gauge rail systems, all his derricks and stuff. So he's constantly adding to it. And the one thing that he does is he brings in modern technology. Now, still it's horsepower, but it was the best you could get at that time. And through the 1888, 89, things start picking up. Now, there's a couple of years in there where the markets for stone kind of impacted what they could produce. And there's, of course, always the river nearby. But at that time, the quarries would run 6 days a week, and workers, labor, just general labor would get anywhere from $1 to $1.50 to $1.75 a day, down to dusk, 6 days a week. And into the 90s, he constructed 10 dwelling houses, 2 boiler houses, and made additions to his blacksmith shop. And we'll get into it later, but the number of workers required just to support this enterprise is actually kind of amazing. And at times, his employment reached 150 to 200 people, which at that time, if you think of the 1890s, we were just experiencing a surge of immigration, but Cedar County population was dropping right after the Civil War. It spiked 50%, then it started dropping 3 to 4% every decade after that. till it got to the 1890s, and then there suddenly a surge. So a lot of the people that he was hiring were immigrants, not necessarily first-generation immigrants, or first-generation Americans, but people that literally had just, sworn allegiance. These raw numbers, 1892 stands out in that by that time they had quarried 5,869 carloads of stone, which would have made up a train 42.5 miles long. So when people ask, where did all the stone go? It went down the railroad. He was also pretty innovative in that by 1893, they had decided to install a reservoir system up on the hill that they could collect water or either pump it in and let it settle out. And by the time it got down the hill, it had enough pressure that they could run faucets and stuff with it. Kind of innovation. You can actually go out there today and find some of those standpipes, stone standpipes that are 30 feet deep. They have bar grates over them. 1898, Millard Y. Bealer, normally just referred to as MY, and actually EJC at one time told some kids that his parents were so poor when he was young that all they could give him was extra letters for his name. I think he pulled the same trick on his son. But, so at 24, MY becomes the superintendent, and EJC is extremely busy with his businesses in Cedar Rapids. He actually co-owns the Cedar Rapids Construction Company, which was a major company, and the Cedar Rapids Canning Works, which specialized in sweet corn. So under MY's guidance and Dad's money, they complete up to right now 37 buildings on site. Again, they are constantly adding new derricks and hoisting machines and changing boilers. And it's always interesting to see that they thought that the greatest thing that they could have done in 1898 is they added an 80 horsepower boiler, which must have seemed like unlimited power to them. At that point in time, they had shipped 55,000 carloads. In 99, the 1890s appeared to be the heyday, the start of the heyday for the bridge building. They were employing 200 men, and half of them setting up a road. At first, I thought this was a road at the quarry, which seemed like they were allocating a lot of men to it, but it was actually the road to Cedar Rapids, between Iowa City and Cedar Rapids. So he was kind of blending his quarry workers and his construction workers. They also erected an immense flume. In order to quarry, you have to take the overburden, the dirt and the small rock off. And they'd been doing that by horse cart. He figured out that he had a big pump that he was using to keep the water out of the pits, so they just turned it around and used it to wash most of the hill down into the river. Which, if you look on the aerial maps, you can see this big sandbar out there. I'm not sure if that's where some of it came from or not, but 1899, 44 carloads of stone cut and numbered in one day, which, that's a lot of people working very hard in one day. 1900, they said it was the busiest season they had had. In 1901, they were sending a shipment of stone for a new bridge in Owatonna, and it had to go through Cedar Rapids, and EJC wanted to make a media event out of it, but the train got there so late it was too dark, and he was a little disappointed, but it was still kind of a spectacle. People came out to see it. By this time, the original pit had been expanded. I don't know if they ran into unsuitable rock or if there was a water issue or what, but they actually, from the first pit right here, they came back and they looped around and kind of drove their quarrying in two directions. And that resulted, because they had to keep one power plant and a derrick there for lifting, that's resulted in the little island that you see in the front quarry. There was equipment sitting there that they couldn't move until the last minute. And that could possibly be some of the equipment that's at the bottom of the quarry. that we've heard stories about. And then after 1903, around 1902, 1903, they abandoned the front quarry and they let it fill, and EJC was very proud of the fact that it was almost a picnic area, sportsman area where you could come fish. It was not unusual, since the quarry was not open on Sunday, for people to come out and gawk, take pictures, and picnic, fish, whatever. And we have a lot of pictures where you see women with parasols and dresses standing at the edge of the quarry, and it makes you kind of wonder what was going on. But it was essentially, you could walk into it. So then once that closed, they were busy on the back quarry. 1902, they were dumping debris from the operation, stripping operation and stuff on the back quarry, and they opened the new pit late, but still were taking rock above the water. When they let the water just gradually rise, they could still take rock off the upper edges and stuff. So to say exactly when the front pit closed is difficult. And then you see a whole bunch of, in the early 1900s, they are awarded all kinds of contracts, and they are extremely busy. And that lasts up until 1907, 1908, 1909, when it appears to fall off, and there can be a couple of reasons for that. It could have been either the fact that Portland cement had shut down the lime industry, and the lime industry took their broken rock, the cold rock that they couldn't use, and would burn it for lime. And the rock that they were quarrying was especially suited for that. Plus, the stone structures for bridges were being replaced by concrete and steel, or even in some cases ductile iron piers. So the age of the stone bridge was kind of coming to a close. And while there's no article ever written that I've seen that says that the quarry was officially closed, all we see that is they are hiring fewer and fewer men, and then finally there's no mention of them in the paper. By 1916, Bealer was selling the equipment, and there was actually an incident where the person he sold it to came to pick it up, and somebody had cut all the brass fittings off of it and made it useless. So they managed to track the guy down, and he paid to have everything repaired so it could be sold. Bealer, though, EJC, he still was very successful after that. I mean, he served prominently in the Cedar Rapids, Lynn County area, elected representative for 3 terms, commander of the Department of Iowa, Grand Army of the Republic in 1918 and 19, and served on the commission for the erection of the memorial building on the island in Cedar Rapids, which was one of his very dear projects, being a Civil War veteran, but he passed away the day before it was opened. So, still very successful, though he isn't one of, Cedar County's, I'd say, people. He did influence us greatly in the Cedar Valley area. MY was the postmaster in Cedar Valley when it first got a post office. And I believe that was just at the office of the quarry. He had some problems in the later years of the quarry. Obviously, he was young, but after him and a companion were horsing around at the base of the bridge, and Bealer lunged at him like he was going to push him, and the guy reacted and grabbed him, and they both fell over about 18 feet. The guy landed on top of Bealer. He broke ribs and everything, and after that, it appears that he had hospitalization, things like that. He didn't quite bounce back from it. So while they're running the quarry, it wasn't all sunshine and roses. Obviously, being next to the river, flooding is an issue. And while everybody along the river understands what the river does, but there were some times when it was really severe. At times it was 4 foot over the railroad tracks, which would have been 4 foot over the low quarry. They had their pump set up in a boxcar, their hydraulic pump, and in one flood, they had to literally lift the boxcar 3 times to keep it out of the water. There were years when it prevented work, even though they had 3 pumps running trying to keep it open. And then in 1903, when the front pit flooded, they just decided not to reopen it. Other things that affected them was rail car shortage. You'd think if you worked for the railroad and you're shipping their goods, you'd be able to get rail cars, but it seemed to happen about every 3 years there for a while. And then in 1899, the soft coal famine. When you're running everything on steam, if you don't have coal, you don't work. There was also market considerations in that Bridgestone was highly lucrative, but it was highly specialized in cutthroat. So if the railroad decided they were going to pull back their construction that year, your income pulled back with it. One of the things that crushed stone being a product that because of all the dirt streets in the cities, a process called macadamizing, which was putting down rough chokestone, 2 layers of rough chokestone, and then covering it with the gravel with an emulsifier on it. That became popular, and that lasted until they figured out how to make pavers real cheap, and then that got replaced. So it was kind of an up and down market for them. So Bealer's legacy is obviously not just the quarry that sits there empty, but it's how it affected the lives and the people in that area and the livelihoods that it provided. It was a very good example of a well-run enterprise. His bridges and stuff are fairly numerous because he was right here in eastern Iowa. A lot of the bridges that were built along the Burlington, Cedar Rapids and Northern, and later the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific were done with stone from Bealer Quarries. And while it's a little tough to chase down exactly where they are, some of them were noted in reports and stuff, so you can still track them down. The other thing, the other legacy is Cedar Valley. Obviously the town wouldn't be there if the quarry wasn't there. When Bealer came in, there wasn't even a road within 3/4 of a mile. And by the time he was done, there was 2 hotels, they had a post office. I mean, it was a thriving area. A lot of it incorporated into the Bealer property, but obviously it was a going concern. Today we have Cedar Valley Park, which is also considered a legacy in my mind. The park ground was eventually, the Bealer quarry site was traded or sold to 2 men from Stanwood who had timber in Canada. And so there was some trade in there. I didn't follow the ownership all the way down, but our county site says that it eventually became owned by Iowa Land and Building, who gifted it to Cedar County. So, and it's a real nice park. Being from the far north end of the county, I don't get down there much, but since I started working on it, I kind of become attached to it. Even in the winter. It's interesting even in the winter. So that's the legacy. That's the history. But that's not the story. The history can be related by telling you all these events and all these facts and figures, but that doesn't get down to the story, which is best told in the collection of pictures. And the thing that impressed me most when I started looking is the quality and the quantity. I researched on the internet quarry and stone. I mean, there's probably 5 or 6 major sites dedicated to quarrying in the 1800s. And when I go through and I look at the pictures that they provide, we have by far an exceptional collection of photographs that show how quarrying was done. And that's where the real story, I think, is looking into exactly what went on out there. If you stop and think that that enterprise pitted muscle and steam against solid rock. And if you didn't do it by hand or with a horse or with steam, it wasn't done. There was no gasoline-powered engines until the very end. Probably, well, the earliest cars would have been in the early 1900s. There were no bobcats or skidsters. You didn't place things over here for now and then move them because the labor to move it would take your profit. Very highly efficient. Everybody knew what their job was. So I think the best way to appreciate the images is to understand exactly what they're doing. And these images, some are such high quality that you can zoom in and you can see the faces on people. And it gets a little eerie knowing that they are not with us anymore. So probably the best way to describe what goes on out there is when you quarry, you have three layers essentially. You have overburden, fractured rock, and solid rock. And you have to remove the overburden, the dirt, the small stone, the organics and everything. And those are pretty much worthless. If you look up around marker 1, you can see a horse cart. There's I don't know, I doubt if there's a rail up there because that's going to be taken out. But they would either move it or they would push it to trestles, carts and trestles, and then dump it into spoil piles down by the river. The fractured stone, it could be picked through and you could pick out sizes. If you know, everybody knows a stone cellar or whatever, probably 8 inches high, 16 inches or less. And they could go through and pick those pieces out and they could sell those as building stone. Or you could sell it as riprap, which would protect embankments around railroad bridge approaches and stuff. Or they could burn it for lime or crush it. So they couldn't just push that layer out of the way. They normally probably blasted that because it didn't matter if it broke up. But the solid stone was the paycheck right there, and it had to be carefully extracted. They used steam channelers, derricks, and steam drills in order to remove this. So this picture is one of the best of the collection, which shows all 3 stages at one point. So Bealer's purpose again was the Bridgestone. That was the money shot for him. And the annual state geologist report, went through and it listed every quarry in the state by county. And you could go through and search through them and pick out exactly. Bealer was one of the few that provided all products because the Bridgestone, the only other place that produced it was Stone City. And they considered the Cedar Valley stone of better quality and better workability. Broken stone, he did a lot of things with. Everything from crushing it up for streets to railroad ballast. But getting started was difficult. The railroad, the Burlington, Cedar Rapids, and Northern, which Bealer had contracts with to build bridges and stuff. So he got his spur line, and they blasted the adjacent bluffs, brought it down. That was in 1884. I think he pretty much announced in April that he was going to go into operation, and by November they had connected the rail. Again, no equipment that wasn't steam fired. They did not. I have never read any. I've never seen any indication that they had a steam shovel. They had just steam powered equipment that was not self-propelled. Let's see. A lot of mules, carts, wagons. There was no electricity, no telephone service. You'll hear that you'll read in the articles that in some cases where there's an accident or something and they need a doctor, 4 guys jump on a hand cart and go to Tipton and get one. Round trip is about 38 minutes. And they were extremely impressed by that speed. Your steam engines and boilers also require coal, which you could bring in on the rail, and clean water. So Initially, they probably used river water that they settled out. Horses and mules had to have stables, they had to have blacksmith, not only for horse shoeing, but also fixing the harness, repairing anything that a blacksmith could repair, and tools like the chisels, the pry bars, things like that. They also had a machine shop, which with the stationary boiler had a drive line that powered tools, because if you needed a precise hole to drill it, you had to have some type of line drive in order to power that drill at speeds that it couldn't be done by a blacksmith. And then again, they had everything from offices and carpenters for houses and trestle work, ladders, etc. So I just picked the 1890s quarry systems and kind of listed out. The intent being that as you go around and you look at the pictures or you see the pictures, a lot of times it's a little confusing as to what they might be doing. So by looking at what their systems were, hopefully it'll give you a better understanding of what is represented in the picture. So first of all, they had two types of rails. They had a regular railroad, standard gauge rail that came in, again, the BCR&N. And they had their own switch yard, or switch areas, extended to wherever they would put product on. So if they were loading bridgestone, which was normally along a river, they would divert those types of flat cars there. If they were doing ballast with the half sides on them, those would go up against the crusher. Then they had the narrow gauge, which they used to transport mostly fractured stone, whether that was to a spot where they could load it onto a flat car, or they would just send it straight into the crusher and crush it. So you'll see some very interesting pictures of people running the horse carts. Stationary boilers, these were essentially big power plants. If you think of steam power as being electrical power, you had a generator, conduits would be the pipes, and then whatever you wanted to power connected to the pipes. The crusher and the machine shop were some of the first things made, and the reason for that is, one, you needed some type of steam power immediately for whatever you were going to do. And second, the crusher, because when they started, just the fractured face of the bluff was available, they could start crushing that rock immediately and have a source of income. And if you go out there, you can still find the remains of a brick pile where the boiler sat. So they also had mobile boilers, and these were so that they could get a power source close to wherever they were working. A lot of times it would be either near a chandler, or, well, chandlers were self-contained, but it would be near one of the derricks, hoisting engines, or it would be where they needed steam power for the drills, etc. So they came on skids, they came on wheels, but they generally were not self-powered. They weren't like railroad cars or anything. And you had to constantly bring your coal and water to them. They also had hydraulic pumps. Bealer had a rail car converted to a pump, what he called his hydraulic pump machine. And in the picture in the upper left, which is, you'll see the blow up of it here in the room, but it had a coal-fired boiler in the back, and then in the foreground is the pump. And they could make that a suction pump or a pressure pump, depending on what they wanted to do with it. So there may have been, other than this car, there may have been some mobile ones to handle flooding. But the pressure pump was used to wash the overburden down the flume and into the river. Probably the most fascinating piece of equipment is the steam-powered channeling machine. And this was a self-contained coal-fired boiler that powered vertical arms with bits on the end of the arms that went up and down. And it could do like 100 to 200 blows per minute. with the steam, and this is a steam piston, so it's just like a locomotive. And and it would move as it did it, and it would take like a 3/4 inch strip, and it would go back and forth in order to cut these long lengths. And it could go down, and mostly in the quarry, I didn't see anything that went real deep. Normally it looked like 4 feet, 4.5 feet. But they could have arms that would go 7 to 12 foot deep, depending on whether you're cutting granite, things like that. And it's a typical production of 50 to 100 feet of channel per day was equal to the labor of 50 to 75 men. And the one shown there is a 6 horsepower. Yeah, lawnmowers will do that. The channelers ran on a unitized rail, which they could pick up and move over, and they would gauge it away from the next one, so the cuts they would keep moving the cuts away to get the size that they want. And they couldn't push it entirely tight to the side wall of the last cut, so they would move it out. And that's why you see the steps in the side of the quarry. The only reason is they had to have some clearance for the next cut. The rock crusher, this was belt driven. It had its own little steam piston engine that was powered by the stationary boiler up at the crusher works. But it had 2 jaws that converged. You set the jaws on the space at the bottom was how big the rock came out. It was essential. It was considered one of the basic things for quarrying. There may be quarries that produce nothing but crushed rock because the cost savings. There were still state penitentiary quarry still broke all its rock by hand. They never converted to steam. So you can imagine having a job which was the same as being in the penitentiary. So 7 to 10 cubic yards per hour. These were located so that they could be offloaded directly into the carts. The rail would come down one side, the narrow gauge rail with the carts would come in. A guy would hand feed it into the crusher. It would drop through and then it hit a chute and they would put it into the rail cars. They could adjust the depth and stuff, how deep. But if you take a look at the guy picking up that rock and the guy standing there, these guys could have had a heck of a football team. The other thing that they had was steam drillers, and these were powered by flexible hoses that were sheathed because of the abrasion of the rocks and stuff. But typically I find that these, because of the size of the bit, these were used for drilling blasting holes. And the reason where you would blast is when you have rock that you didn't blast near solid rock because you didn't want to fracture. So this was normally, I think, used for clearing out areas of fractured rock that you just needed to get out of the way quickly. And it would do 300 to 600 impacts a minute, and whereas a man could do 30. The one shown to the left is, though, a pneumatic one that was considered state-of-the-art, but they didn't have air compressors yet, so they didn't use it. They look very similar. Also, the cans at the base of in the photograph, at the base of that drill, are empty blasting powder cans with the tops off, and they probably use those for water. Probably the most prominent thing when you look at the photographs is the guide derricks. And this is a system of masts that are connected. If you think of like a circus tent, everything is cabled together and then down to a ground point in order to support it. The masts could rotate. Everything connected at the top was a ring with a pin in it, so the mast could rotate 360. And then the jib or the boom was run with a block and tackle, which the cable connected to your hoist engines. And the hoist engines would either reel the cable in or out. Some of them could handle 2 or 3 cables up into them, so you could be lifting the actual stone up without moving the boom, or you could just move the boom up Some of them were powered so that you could spin them from the hoist engine. So I think I counted 16 of these at one point in one picture. So they had a limited range, a reach, and you could actually move items horizontally by hooking two of them on and lifting it, and then one letting line out and the other one pulling it in, so you could move stuff across the quarry. Let's see, you had to constantly maintain them. They keep referring to wire rope, but it's actually steel cables, what we would call it. And even today out on the site, the tie downs for a lot of this equipment are still visible in solid rock, 1.5-inch diameter steel. Pretty impressive when you get up on them. So working in tandem with the derricks or the hoisting machines, and these essentially they did not have a boiler with them. You hooked the boiler up, so they were kind of an individual package that provided the piston and the gear drums, and you could get up to 6 drums. A lot of times for bridge building, you had to do a lot of different tilting and things like that, so you had to have multiple ways of adjusting the load. Again, with the coal-fired boiler, you can see in the picture that picture's actually taken on that little island. In addition to that, the hoisting engines, the original ones, were the horse-powered sweeps, where you'd hook the horse up and hook into the arm and run him around in a circle. And you could flip a lever for it to go up and down, but stop and go was voice activated. So when you go to lift stone, you have to hook onto it somehow, and they have what they call stone dogs, which are a grapple system, a double hook. And in order to make sure you got a good bite, you would chisel some small indentations in the side of the stone and hook it into it and then raise it up. And you can find those on just about any stone of any size, even on railroad. If you look at pictures of railroad bridges where they have the big stones, you'll see a little dimple in it. And you think it's an imperfection, but when you get to looking, there's one in every one of them. So, still visible. They also had stone boats, which are just little wooden platforms that they would throw loose stone in. And then they had lift boxes, which they could fill with coal. They could, put barrels of water in it. They could lift men with it. They were just a little bit higher side on them, heavy, ready to be connected to the crane. So here's the one thing that probably catch your eye when you're looking. This is a process called gadding. And it's when you have to make a horizontal hole, but you're too close to a vertical face and a horizontal face, and you need to split that up off the bed. And it was a 2-man process. I personally, in a quarry that probably reaches 110 degrees in the summer, I'm not too thrilled about getting that job. But and if you look at the picture on the lower right, you can see where they've gone by hand and put the holes in by hand. The term gadding about actually comes from this process where in the quarries in the east, where they would follow the grain of the stone, the holes would look like they would wander. And so it was where our term gadding about, being no pattern, no reason. And then there were the ladders. If you look in the picture, I think I've seen ladders reaching 50 feet that were handmade. And like I said, not me. I'm going to be good friends with the guy running the hoist box. There's also hand tools. So in order to, they didn't use dynamite to split stone, simply the large stone, simply because of dynamite, well, I'll get into that in blasting. But they used a system of splitting wedges that were called plug and feathers or wedge and feathers, and you would drill a hole and you would then place these so that the wedges were faced away from the direction you wanted it to go. And then you would just sit there and you would just tap up and down the line, and the pressure would gradually increase, and then it would snap the stone open. This is still used today. Matter of fact, when I was searching for wedge and feathers, I thought, well, maybe somebody has an old set of them that I could buy. So I looked for them for sale, and I found some. $25 at Lowe's. They still use them for breaking small stones in yards in Europe. So if you've got a stone about this big, you buy a couple sets and you can split it in half and get it out. Also, in looking through some of the catalogs from that time period, when I look at the size, like 14 pounds was the minimum size on one of these, I'm sitting there going, today I don't think we would make it. Now understand that in the quarry they not only broke stone and moved, but they also dressed it, cleaned up the sides of it to get the rough stone look that you see on the bridges and stuff. Oops, how do we go back? Okay, blasting. Typically, they would use blasting powder. One, because, and the B grade, they would use because the grains are bigger, which means it would burn slower and the explosion would build and then break. Dynamite was too volatile for them. So that's why they only used it when they didn't care what happened to the rock. I can't see in any of the drawings anything that would indicate that they used any type of powder around the solid stone. But there is the remains of what appears to be a powder magazine. That structure, as it stands today, you can see that the ceiling was made out of solid stone slabs supported by railroad rails, which would lead me to believe that's not an ice house. So, very sturdy structure. And there are stories of people that have relatives that, oh, as a kid I used to carry the blasting equipment. Guess they were more nimble. So then once you see all the systems and you stop and think about all the workers that had to be in there, from administration, the stationary engineers were the guys that handled the boilers, because the boilers required, you had to have a special knowledge of how to bank the coals at night to keep the heat. You had to know when to oil them, you had to know, watch the water, watch the pressure. So those guys are normally standing around, their clothes are fairly clean. Pick them out. Pipe fitters, whenever you needed to extend steam someplace, you had to have somebody that could connect the pipes. Sluicing team, a lot of these, when I say team, it could just be that there were several people that did several of these jobs. I don't think they had a specific person that sat there waiting for sluicing to occur, but they had to watch the monitor, make sure that the flume stayed clear. Channeling team, I think that was typically a three-man team. There was one guy that was essentially the engineer, another one that was helping to direct, and the third guy I think was a general laborer. Steam drillers, two-man teams, simply because those things were heavy. The whole premise of the thing was that it was on a tripod with heavy weights, so that when it hit the stone, the weight of the machine would cause it to chip instead of just recoil. So you had to haul all the pieces around, and they were stout. Hoisting teams, again, there had to be one guy running the hoisting engine. There had to be one spotter, and then there would have to be a rigger or a coordinator down on the quarry floor. Stone cutters, you'll see in some of the pictures, they take a stone and they true it up, and when it's done, plumb hook onto it, put it on a railroad car. Blasters, I have read stories that there were people that were considered specialized in it. I got that from an article where one guy blew his face off. So he apparently went to re-drill a hole that had been charged. Pressure operator, that's the guy shown at left. I'm guessing you just got to be burly. General labor is the same way. Machinist, you just had to be able to work on the finer machinery, whether it be fittings for steam engine or drilling accurate holes, etc. Blacksmiths, the blacksmith shop that they show, I think I count 4 flues coming up off of their forges, so it must have been a lot of work. I know that each one of those bits can be sharpened in a kind of a mold. So they had their hands full, just keeping everything sharp and everything. Switchman, I'm not sure that was a specialized guy because they did like 1 train a day, but somebody had to know where they were going. And you had all the teamsters and the stable hands, etc. Water boys and gophers. It's not unusual. 8th grade education was as high as a lot of them went. So being employed at 14, you probably didn't make $1 or $1.50 a day, but anything helped pay your family's way was money in the bank. So the interesting thing, in just looking, I was trying to understand, the people, the influx, there's always a lot of stories about immigrant labor in the quarry. And so when you look at it, there were a lot of first-generation Americans that came into the United States, their parents, and then the opportunity for land, etc., to the west pulled the first-generation people in. But in the 1890s, that jumped, and it became that, I think it was just 20 to 30% of the population could have been new immigrants. So the picture to the left, and listening to or reading an article about the quarries in the East, is sometimes it wasn't unusual for a child to come with the parent to work to act as an interpreter, because they were going to school in the winters and they were learning English, whereas their parents may not have been. So if there was a group that spoke a specific language, they might have a kid there to help them understand what they were being told to do. And they could also get water, etc. They had some what they call lumpers, which when they were dressing the stone, the pieces that they would cut off, they would clean those out away so the stonemason could work. But it was right in the transition where we were moving from subsistence farming on a small farm to, market oriented. They were raising crops, profit. $1 to $1.50 a day doesn't seem like much, but I think the average cost of an acre was like $35. So you could build up enough money to buy a farm. So the photo gallery that we have up is to give everyone an opportunity to take a closer look. And the labels on them, it's got an identifier, and then we also try to give a brief description and an orientation because of the fact that the quarry developed a void instead of building into something, it evolved into a void. Sometimes it's tough to understand what you're looking at, so hopefully the little orientation will help. And again, remember the one near the river is the front. I'd like to thank you for attending. We'll have questions. Anybody's got questions?
Knowing what it looks like today, I wondered where they were at, and is there any foundations left?
Yes. Actually, I think it's the 1901 or 1916 map has a blow up of the area. The woods, okay, if you're at the back quarry and you're up against the back wall, which would be the west wall, is what I'd call it. Over in that woods, there were at least 8 or 9 there. And once you go up and further to the south, the hotel, they had a hotel up there out in that field. We found several foundations. I call it the RV park that has the big retaining wall. If you follow that along, you'll find several like 16 by 16 foundations sticking out. Then you got you want to go out there really in the spring because once the greenery comes out, it's tough to find stuff. But yeah, there are still foundations and stuff out there.
Did I read that right? They rented blocks, 4 foot by 6 foot by 156 foot?
That was one of their, I don't know if it was a publicity stunt or what, but when they say quarried, I'm not sure if they mean actually lifted because the tonnage of a stone that size would be enormous. I think is what they meant is they broke it free from the bed without cracking it in length. And yeah, there was, in the article it talks about that would have been longer than the biggest beam in Solomon's temple, and it was Solomon's temple, the depth of it was like 12 feet deep in order to keep it from cracking. So yeah, there's some real interesting little articles. But yeah, I think it made how many train car loads? It was 20 some train car loads out of one stone. Any other questions?
Yeah. This spur line that they built, now that follows the road along the river there, originally, the railroad?
Yep. They came down where the bridge comes across Buchanan to Plato. They spurred off there at Plato, swung around, and it went down to, I haven't identified the absolute end of it. It said Tom Fitzpatrick Spring. So I'm not sure where that's at, but it went well past the quarries.
How deep did they go on them quarries?
80 to 90 feet. There was one in there that a newspaper article said that it was 15 rods deep and 200 and some feet. I don't think they got that right. I think they might have been 5 rods. So 80 to 90, and then they took 60 feet at least off above them.
Are you talking 80 to 90 beyond where it's at now?
From the edge down to the bottom.
And they were able to pump that out? They had a big enough pump?
Well, I think they always dealt with water. And in some of the photos, you'll actually see down at the bottom, there would be like probably a 50 by 50 square foot pool that was left there, and they went past it, and it was full of water. So I think when they hit something like a spring, they would just leave that and let it fill up until it held the water back. Pumping it out, they could work around it because they could work the upper areas, even if it was as they were pumping it down. And that was normally just in the spring when they had problems with it, is what I've read, is normally in the spring. But did it fill up naturally because of the spring? I don't think so. I didn't read that.
Were there very many injuries?
Oh yeah. I didn't get into documenting all of them, but there was, if you saw the stone dogs, one guy, it slipped off, hit him in the head and punched a 2-inch hole in his skull. He walked home and waited for the doctor. The doctors came looking for him. He wasn't at the quarry, so they went to his house. And it ended up getting a plate put in, but they said it had no after effects. And there was some other, people stepping on. You step off a 30-foot ledge, you're going to get killed. Yeah, there were accidents, but they didn't report them in the newspaper unless they were sensational.
I wanted to ask the Kennebrants, who are very familiar with this type of process, how do you think that compared with what you were experienced as a modern stone dweller?
Well, it was a pretty fantastic operation with the family there. And I'm not sure how many other places had such a sophisticated setup.
There was capital put into that quarry.
That was, it's impressive.
Mhm. Any other questions?
We talked to a guy this morning that scuba dived that, and he said now there's so much silt down in there, they're not as deep as what people think they are. They went down with the Davenport Fire Department, as a training, and he said the silt, he didn't say how far down, but he said it ain't like.
It's still fairly deep, but there's 100 years of silt.
Yeah.
So, and the river, floods regularly.
Right.
But the actual to the bottom of the stone should be around 80 to 90.
Bealer must have had a lot of capital.
He was a very industrious man.
I would assume most of the workers came from, like the Cedar Rapids area, very few came from local.
I know that Bealer advertised for labor in all like West Branch, the Cedar County newspapers, Iowa City and Cedar Rapids, because he was looking for laborers for his construction business, his canning business. But I think you didn't drive to work, so you had to live in the area.
Well, and the river would be a problem until they had a bridge.
Yep. So you probably lived on that side of the river.
I'm curious, so many people today are here because they had relatives working there. You could have a show of hands on.
How many people had relatives that worked there? How many of them still work there? You could be a conservation officer and still work.
You say was, in 1900, one of the censuses listed a lot of the workers, and most of them were immigrants, Czech, Scottish,
Yeah,
Irish.
you can go back into the census records and you can find where people from that area listed their occupation as laborer at quarry, stationary engineer at quarry, etc. And when you look, there's a lot of Czech and Irish and
Food products, how did they get their food for
Oh.
people until they started the grocery store?
brought it in a tin. You had your large tin. They didn't provide any food. Everybody would have to bring it in. They did have a grocery store there. There was a company store, and then others developed, I think, up on the hill in Cedar Valley. Yeah, it was.
I saw it one time there, you had something about Rigby and Miller.
Yeah, or cleaning. Yeah.
Would that have been the Rigby from Stanwood then?
Yeah, the Rigby's from Stanwood in recent history owned a large lumberyard chain in the Midwest, and that's probably how the family had timberland in Canada to trade for the ground. But after they bought it, nothing really became of it, so I don't know if they got that good of a deal.
I have two short questions. One is, how much company housing was there? And the other one is, how do the deposits and size compare to Stone City?
So the housing, I don't have a complete total, but I know the boarding house, there's pictures of the boarding house with probably 20 people shown. You can see one over there that you had to work there to live there. And the housing extended as you come down the hill from Cedar Valley on the bluff going to the north. I believe there was some along there. It was sprinkled throughout the timber up behind there. Now, the one thing is, if you go back and look at aerial photographies from the 1930s, that ground wasn't as brushy as it is now. I mean, there were open spaces and there were houses up in there. Totally, I don't know, but I think there was a high rate of tenancy at that time in the area, so people probably rented little houses around it. And the second question was?
Was how the size of the deposit compared to Stone City, the limestone deposit?
I only read about the quality because the quantity only matters as far as you can go get it. And if you know, Stone City is still in business and they are still taking out quality limestone.
I've heard the train system ran on gravity. Can you tell us anything about that?
I read that too, and I think it merely states that the rail cars could be loaded and it was level, so that it took very little to get them moved. They could put a train together, so once you load a car, you could hook a horse onto it and pull it out of the way, bring the next one up, and then push it down and connect them. I don't think that it ran by gravity all the way to Plato, so just enough to where an engine could hook onto it. And there were accidents with the train engines too. I think Marcia had just given me an article recently about going around the bend north of where the bridge was, that the locomotive left the track and went into the river, and 2 carloads of stone piled on top of it. And they pulled it out and sent it for repairs.
Are there any Bealers around?
I don't know.
There's Bealers that are like south of Downey, down in around West Branch area. I hear that name, but I don't know if it's spelled the same or not.
I don't believe he only
think
had
it's
one
spelled the same.
son. He only had one son who did not have sons.
You said that most of the stone was used for, building bridges and stuff. Do you know if any of the stone was used in construction? And if so, would you know if any of the buildings that might still be standing?
Yes. Any of the buildings built in 1890 to 1915 or whatever that Bealer did, that he was involved with the construction of foundations, because those big stones were highly prized for big foundation, high-rise, 5 or 6 story buildings. I remember 3rd Avenue Hotel in Cedar Rapids, there was an article saying they were installing the foundations. He was personally supervising. So it must have been a massive foundation. And there's some churches in Iowa City, a couple others that you could, if you look for Bealer's construction, you know he's using his own stone for his foundations.
How much equipment is still in the bottom of the pit?
I'd like to know. I've talked to a couple people that have dove, and they say, yes, there's some down there. But what it is, we're not sure.
Is it because the thing flooded and they couldn't get it out, or you know that?
So my thought would be that the back quarry would be the only one that would have equipment left due to catastrophic flooding or something happening suddenly that they couldn't get it out. Otherwise, we know that Bealer sold his equipment. So unless he sold it and those people didn't realize it flooded, or like in the front quarry on that little island, once you start taking the guy derricks down, you don't have a way of lifting the last one off of there. So yeah, that's lost to time. It'd be interesting. There are companies that'll do underwater mapping.
Yeah.
They could tell you exactly what the bottom of those quarries look like.
Is there any record in there of the smaller stuff, like barns and houses, the foundations out here?
It just says that building stone is available. So assume if you were building a house or whatever, you could walk in and say, what do you got? And they probably have a pile of it. But any specific houses, no. Building stone, there was dressed stone, which was trimmed up nicely to even units, and then there was, you know, I got a guy that can put that together, so.
How many people here went swimming out there?
I know you've been in there. I was gonna say, if you came here looking for memories from the 60s and 70s, then you're... Else?
Is it safe to assume the pillars from the old bridge that you can still see on the river, that stone came from the quarry? I would assume it did.
I don't know if Bealer had that contract, because he was so close. I know that he was instrumental. He pushed it through the county. You can read 4 years of back and forth between the two parties, to why we don't need it. But I don't know if he would have taken that contract.
I just wanna make a note of those old pillars for the bridge. The center pillar has moved downstream 20 feet maybe, and stayed vertical with an ice jam, which probably sets on wood piles, and that stone probably set on top of that, but just, if you had an opportunity to stop and look across that sometime, either from the stable side or the Cedar Valley side, you'll see that center pier downstream. Consider that hydraulic pressure of that ice that was able to do that. Since that point, a lot of it started to tumble over, but the first initial years, it stayed straight up and down.
Well, again, thanks for coming, and we are looking at developing a program on the lime kilns. That's kind of set off to the side, and I think it would also be interesting, with enough interest from the presentation on the quarries, it'd be interesting to hear from people as to, you know, any stories. We're if you'll notice, we have no relics from that time period, not even an axe head. So if you know of anybody that has anything that's related to the Bealer quarries, we'd be interested in talking to them. Again, thanks for coming, and feel free to hang around and look at the pictures, and thank you very much.